energy. Our dependence on foreign oil is at its lowest point in 16 years. By the middle of the next decade, our cars will average nearly 55 miles per gallon. Thousands of Americans have jobs right now because the production of renewable energy in this country has nearly doubled in just 3 years. So now is not the time to cut these investments to pay for another $4 billion giveaway to the oil companies. Now is the time to end the subsidies for an industry that's rarely been more profitable. Let's double down on a clean energy future that's never been more promising for our economy and for our security and for the safety of our planet. That's why I'm running for president. That's the choice in this election we'll have. For the first time in 9 years, there are no Americans fighting in Iraq. Osama bin Laden is no longer a threat to this country. Al-Qaeda is on the path to defeat. And by 2014, the war in Afghanistan will be over. America's safer and more respected because of the courage and selflessness of the United States Armed Forces. And as long as I'm Commander-in-Chief, this country will care for our veterans and serve our veterans as well as they've served us. Because nobody who fights for this country should have to fight for a job or a roof over their heads when they come home. My opponent said it was tragic to end the war in Iraq. He said he won't set a timeline for ending the war in Afghanistan. I have, and I intend to keep it. After a decade of war that's cost us thousands of lives and over $1 trillion, the nation we need to build is our own. I will use half of what we're no longer spending on war to pay down the deficit and the other half to repair our roads and our bridges, our runways and our wireless networks. That's the choice in this election, to rebuild America. I'm running to pay down our debt in a way that's balanced and responsible. After inheriting a $1 trillion deficit, I signed $2 trillion of spending cuts into law. And now I want to finish the job by streamlining government and cutting more waste and reforming our tax code so that it is simpler and fairer and asks the wealthiest Americans to pay a little bit more. Now, my opponent won't tell us how he'd pay for his new $5 trillion tax cut, a tax cut that gives an average of $250,000 to every millionaire in this country. But we know the bill for that tax cut will either be passed on to our children or it'll be paid for by a whole lot of ordinary Americans. That's what we know. And I refuse to let that happen again. I refuse to pay for another millionaire's tax cut by eliminating medical research projects into things like cancer and Alzheimer's disease. I refuse to pay for another tax cut by kicking children off of Head Start programs, or asking students to pay more for college, or eliminating health insurance for millions of poor and elderly and disabled Americans on Medicaid. And as long as I'm President of the United States, I will never allow Medicare to be turned into a voucher that would end the program as we know it. We will not go back to the days when our citizens spent their golden years at the mercy of private insurance companies. We will reform Medicare not by shifting the costs of care to seniors, but by reducing the spending that isn't making people healthier. That's what's at stake in this election. That's what's at stake, Ohio. On issue after issue, we can't afford to spend the next 4 years going backward. You know, America doesn't need to refight the battles we just had over Wall Street reform and health care reform. You know, on health care reform, here's what I know. Allowing 2.5 million young people to stay on their parents' health insurance plan, that was the right thing to do. Cutting prescription drug costs for seniors, that was the right thing to do. I will not go back to the days when insurance companies had unchecked power to cancel your policy or deny your coverage or charge women differently from men. We're not going back there. We're going forward. We don't need another political fight about ending a woman's right to choose or getting rid of Planned Parenthood. Or taking away access to affordable birth control. I want women to control their own health choices, just like I want my daughters to have the same opportunities as your sons. We are not turning back the clock. We are moving forward. We're not returning to the days when you could be kicked out of the United States military just because of who you are or who you love. That would be wrong for our national security, and it would be a betrayal of our values. This should be the last election where multi-million-dollar donations speak louder than the voices of ordinary citizens. We need more checks on lobbyists and special interests, not less. We're not going to eliminate the EPA. We're not going to roll back the bargaining rights that generations of workers fought for. It's time to stop denying citizenship to responsible young people just because they're the children of undocumented immigrants. This country is at its best. This country is at its best when we harness the God-given talents of every individual. When we hear every voice. When we come together as one American family, striving for the same dream. That's what we're fighting for. That's what we're fighting for, Ohio. A bold America. A competitive America. A generous America, a forward-looking America where everybody has a chance to make of their life what they will. That's what made us the envy of the world That's what makes us great. That's why I'm running again for President of the United States. And that is why I need your help. Ohio, this election will be even closer than the last. You know, too many of our friends, too many of our neighbors are still hurting because of this crisis. I've heard from too many people wondering why they haven't been able to get one of the jobs that have been created, why their home is still underwater, why their family hasn't yet been touched by the recovery. The other side won't be offering these Americans a real answer to these questions. They won't offer a better vision or a new set of ideas. But they will be spending more money than we've ever seen before on negative ads, on TV, on radio, in the mail, on the internet, ads that exploit people's frustrations for my opponent's political gain. Over and over again, they'll tell you that America's down and out. And they'll tell you who to blame. And ask if you're better off than you were before the worst crisis in our lifetime. We've seen that play before. But you know what? The real question, the question that will actually make a difference in your life and in the lives of your children, is not just about how we're doing today. It's about how we'll be doing tomorrow. Will we be better off if more Americans get a better education? That's the question. Will we be better off if we depend less on foreign oil and more on our own ingenuity? That's the question. Will we be better off if we start doing some nation building right here at home? That's the question. Will we be better off if we bring down our deficit without gutting the very things we need to grow? When we look back 4 years from now, or 10 years from now, or 20 years from now, won't we be better off if we have the courage to keep moving forward? That's the question in this election. That's the question in this election. And the outcome is entirely up to you. Yeah, sure, we'll have to contend with even more negative ads, with even more cynicism and nastiness, and sometimes just plain foolishness. There'll be more of that than we saw in the last campaign. But if there's one thing that we learned in 2008, it's that nothing is more powerful than millions of voices calling for change. When enough of you knock on doors, when you pick up phones, when you talk to your friends, when you decide that it's time for change to happen, guess what? Change happens. Change comes to America. And that's the spirit we need again. If people ask you what this campaign is about, you tell them it's still about hope. You tell them it's still about change. You tell them it's still about ordinary people who believe that in the face of great odds, we can make a difference in the life of this country. Because I still believe, Ohio, I still believe that we are not as divided as our politics suggest. I still believe that we have more in common than the pundits tell us. That we're not Democrats or Republicans, but Americans first and foremost. I still believe in you. And I'm asking you to keep believing in me. I told you in 2008 that I wasn't a perfect man and I would never be a perfect president. But I promised that I would always tell you what I thought. I would always tell you where I stood. And I would wake up every single day fighting for you as hard as I know how. And I have kept that promise. I have kept that promise, Ohio. And I will keep it so long as I have the honor of being your president. So if you're willing to stick with me, if you're willing to fight with me and press on with me, if you're willing to work even harder in this election than you did in the last election, I guarantee you we will move this country forward. We will finish what we started. We are still fired up. We are still ready to go. And we are going to remind the world once more just why it is that the United States of America is the greatest nation on earth. Thank you.